Welcome to this explainer. Okay, what if I told you that almost everything you've ever been taught about how the universe works might be completely wrong? Today, we are unpacking a concept that might fundamentally shatter how you view reality itself. We're digging into a truly revolutionary paper published in May 2026 by physicist Peter Baldwin. It's called Toward an Emergent Gravitational and Propagation Sector in General Emergence Mechanics. Now, this isn't just some minor tweak to existing physics, it is a massive, radical reimagining of the origins of gravity. For over a century, we've relied on very specific math about space and time to explain why things fall, or why planets orbit. But Baldwin's work, it suggests a completely different architecture for the universe.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because I really want to disrupt your current assumptions right out of the gate. Think about gravity for a second. You probably picture it as an invisible tether pulling objects together, right? Or maybe you imagine that classic physics analogy of a heavy bowling ball sitting on a rubber trampoline, warping the fabric of space-time. But what if both of those ideas are merely describing the symptoms and completely missing the actual disease? What if gravity, as a fundamental, independent force, doesn't actually exist at all?
To answer that, here is our roadmap. We are going to build the rules of the universe back up from scratch. We'll start with a new view of gravity, explain the coherence shell, discover the emergent speed limit, look at gravity as refraction, recreate Einstein's math, and then tie it all together with the unified universe. Let's get going.
Section 1. A new view of gravity, breaking the old rules.
So, the entire foundation of Baldwin's paper rests on this theoretical framework called General Emergence Mechanics, or GEM, and it totally flips the script on the idea of existence. In GEM, stable existence doesn't just happen because you drop an object onto a pre-existing grid of space and time. Instead, existence relies entirely on persistence within what is called a dynamical coherent shell. Simply put, for any physical structure to survive and remain viable in the universe, it has to actively persist, constantly fighting to maintain its state inside this vibrating dynamic shell.
Let's put standard physics and GEM side by side to really highlight this massive shift in perspective. In standard Newtonian or Einsteinian physics, gravity is the boss. It's an external reality, a fundamental force or space-time curvature that's imposed on the universe. Things move because space-time tells them how to move. But in general emergence mechanics, gravity isn't a rule. It's an emergent side effect. It's basically a secondary consequence of internal structures just trying to survive and keep their persistence going within that coherent shell. It's a byproduct.
Section 2. The coherent shell explained. The ingredients of reality. Now, what's really interesting about this is how it takes some seriously intimidating math, specifically the effective shell Lagrangian, and turns it into a surprisingly simple recipe. According to the paper, near its optimal state, the shell is governed by three main components. First, temporal inertia, represented by chi, which basically just resists changes over time. Second is spatial stiffness, or lambda, which resists stretching across space. And third, a stabilizing potential, which acts to keep the shell at its preferred phase. You really don't need a PhD in theoretical physics to grasp this. Our universe hates changing too fast, it hates stretching too much, and it has a preferred baseline state it desperately wants to return to.
And what exactly is that secret baseline state? Well, the math dictates that the stabilizing potential has a very specific preferred minimum phase of 255 degrees. This is absolutely crucial, folks, because it shows us that the coherent shell is not just empty, neutral static. It has a specific, active state that it continuously wants to maintain to keep things stable.
Section 3. The emergent speed limit. Discovering light speed.
When Baldwin crunches the numbers around that 255-degree sweet spot we just talked about, something literally mind-blowing falls out of the equation. In the long wavelength limit, the phase velocity approaches a specific shell propagation speed, and that speed is calculated simply as the spatial stiffness divided by the temporal inertia. Do you catch what that means? It means general emergence mechanics naturally contains a characteristic causal speed limit. It arises completely by accident just from the universe having stiffness and inertia. This perfectly mimics the formal role of our real-world observed speed of light.
Section 4. Gravity as refraction. The optical illusion of mass.
To really understand this next part, we have to talk about persistence depth. Baldwin proposes that the universe isn't perfectly uniform everywhere. Instead, deeper regions of this coherent shell are actually locally stiffer in direct proportion to their depth, so you literally have a spatially varying stiffness across the universe.
So I really want you to think about this for a second. If propagation speed is driven by stiffness, and stiffness actually changes depending on the depth of the shell, how does a varying speed limit across space somehow create what we feel as gravity?
Let's move to the next step and see how this builds, because the optical analogy here is incredible. It all comes back to Fermat's principle, the rule that light always takes the fastest path. First, as we know, persistence depth varies across the shell. Second, because of that varying depth, the propagation speed actually drops in the deeper, stiffer areas. You can think of it like those areas having a higher refractive index. Third, Fermat's principle means that trajectories will naturally bend toward those deeper, slower regions to optimize their travel time, much like light bending when it hits water. And fourth, that bending of trajectories is exactly what we observe as Newtonian attraction in the weak field limit. That's right, gravity is basically an optical illusion caused by the refraction of the universe's causal speed limit. No way, right?
Section 5. Recreating Einstein's math. Proving the concept.
And this brilliantly illustrates why Baldwin's paper is making such massive waves. By explicitly splitting the temporal and spatial response functions in the math, this emergent framework perfectly recovers the standard weak field Schwarzschild metric. That's Einstein's math. This isn't just vague hand-waving, it rigorously explains real-world phenomena like gravitational redshift. It even perfectly accounts for that characteristic factor of 2 in light deflection that famously proved Einstein's theory back in the 1919 solar eclipse. Now, Baldwin is super careful to note that this is still an exploratory framework and not a completed derivation of Einstein's exact field equations yet, but the way it perfectly aligns with weak field physics is absolutely staggering.
Section 6. The Unified Universe. A new perspective.
So the crucial point is summarized beautifully in this quote directly from the conclusion of the paper. Baldwin writes, "Gravity is not added to the shell from outside. It is one of the ways the shell behaves when persistence varies across itself." The conceptual shift here is just profound. Internal structure and external dynamics are no longer governed by separate, isolated principles. They are just different expressions of a single, unified architecture of persistence. Gravity and the speed of light emerge from the exact same structural mechanisms.
Which leaves us with a truly lingering, kind of wild thought to end this explainer. If one of the most undeniable, fundamental forces of our daily lives, gravity, is really just a refractive illusion caused by the varying depth of a coherent shell trying to persist, what else about our physical universe is merely a side effect? What other things do we take for absolute granted every single day that are just symptoms of something deeper? It completely changes how you look at the space around you, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep questioning the fabric of reality.